Texas Monthly.
It's December, and I'm in Vietnam, at a massive war memorial on top of a hill in Quang Binh province. I'm not alone. With me are 3 officials from the Vietnamese Ministry of Foreign Affairs, including a minder assigned to me by the government. I agreed not to use his real name, so I'll refer to him as Hugh. Hugh is in his 30s and wears glasses. He's courteous, if a bit formal. Standing next to me, he points to a red-roofed temple with an altar bathed in golden light.
To worship and then pay tribute to the martyrs.
Okay.
You want to join?
Sure, yes.
Yeah, it's like the rule to go here, and then it's not the rule, regulation. If you stop here, you
have
do
to,
that.
yes, right.
Like paying respect to the people who live here.
We entered the temple.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then the bust is Ho Chi Minh? Or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Ho Chi Minh.
Yeah.
On the center of the altar, surrounded by decorative urns and vases with flowers, is a golden bust of Ho Chi Minh, the man who'd led North Vietnam during the war until his death in 1969. The 3 officials light sticks of incense, bow in front of the altar, and mutter a prayer. The smell of the incense carries through the mountain air. I step back out to take in the scenery, a hilly emerald green countryside. The view is beautiful, but for Vietnamese people, this is also a place of mourning. The temple is a monument to what happened here during the war. The Long Dai River winds through these hills, east toward the ocean. In the valley below us, the big river narrows a bit. During the war, this is where a pontoon bridge, called the Long Dai Ferry, led to a staging area for the roads into South Vietnam, what the US dubbed the Ho Chi Minh Trail. The trail was North Vietnam's key artery for sending men and supplies to the south, and the primary target for enemy bombers. The first American bombs targeting the trail were dropped here, at the Long Dai Ferry. The ferry was bombed another 4,000 times after that. There isn't an estimate for how many Vietnamese died defending the ferry, but undoubtedly thousands did. Nonetheless, every time the US destroyed the ferry and its defenses, the Vietnamese rebuilt them quickly. This was a place of strategic importance, but also futility and mass death. Just outside the temple, I spot a light gray stone carved with 12 lines in Vietnamese.
This looks like a poem.
Poem.
Yeah.
Yeah. The parade. Yeah, the night parade through the ferry dock.
It says this poem about the nighttime parade, or march across the ferry, is by a martyr, a North Vietnamese fighter killed in the war, named Vu Dinh Vuon. He wrote this in 1972. That night, under the moonlight, we crossed the Long Dai Ferry, where the enemy's bomb fragments were thicker than gravel. It was a path that brought blood back to the heart. As the ferry crossed through the night, I saw the fire calling for the days to come. At the end of that year, on December 27th, Tiny 05 was flying here. I wanted to see the place, not just because of its significance in the war, but to picture what happened here that night. The way the 4 horsemen reconstructed events, Ron Forrester and Jim Chipman flew right over this spot around 8:45 p.m. North Vietnamese gunners would have heard Tiny 05, flying under the clouds, and launched a barrage into the sky, from cannons, machine guns, even rifles. More than 2,400 rounds, over a minute of non-stop firing, a widening constellation of fiery lead. Tiny 05 made it through, but without dropping its bombs. Jim Chipman kept flying, out toward the Gulf of Tonkin, and then came back around. A few minutes later, they were back, approaching the highway south of the ferry. By now, other militia units might have known that an enemy jet was in the area. Ron Forrester might have had his head down, searching for a target, eyes glued to the glowing radar screen, lining up his shot. It would have happened fast. An explosion in the sky, pieces of wreckage from the plane, and the bodies of 2 young Marines rained down onto the earth below. 47 years later, in January 2020, a team of American archaeologists returned to Quang Binh to recover the 2 Marines. From Texas Monthly, I'm Josh Alvarez, and this is the final flight of Captain Forrester. Episode 4, The Dig. The team was 150 people in all, a contingent from the DPAA, plus American contractors and local residents. The dig site was a large rice paddy, a few hundred meters from the village of An Thủy. Permission had been arranged with all the necessary Vietnamese offices. The Americans would drain the water and compensate farmers for the rice harvest they'd miss because of the dig. And they were prepared to stay for as long as the Vietnamese would allow, usually around 45 days. They'd barely unpacked when the coronavirus outbreak began, forcing the team to pack their things and go home, with no idea when or even if they could return. Karoni couldn't have seen it coming, of course. But also, in a way, she might have known. After decades of obstacles coming between her and her father, here was yet another. Already, she hadn't been sure what to expect from the dig.
So, I was pleasantly surprised. I'd written lots of love notes saying, please go dig it.
She wasn't convinced the government had quite the right spot.
Well, I figured at this point, though, they got to dig that before they're going to dig somewhere else. They're not even bothering to look just over there where we told them to go look.
After a year, the agency decided it was safe to return. In the summer of 2021, the team came back with their tents and their tools. Days began at 6:45, with a 45-minute walk to the site. On the way in, workers passed 2 posters, one for each of the missing Marines, with their photographs and a few details about them in English and Vietnamese. Each morning, the site leader shared a story about Ron Forrester or Jim Chipman, so everyone knew who they were looking for. This is U.S. Army Captain Will Ryan, who gave those talks.
So the service members really on the team related to a father leaving his family to make a difference in a cause he believed in. When I was kind of leaving my son, about the same time Karoni was when Ron left her, essentially.
He told the team little things that Don had shared about his brother.
Everyone could relate to a kid that went up on the roof and almost jumped off with a homemade parachute.
Or that Ron had written in letters home.
Talking about being an escort at the Bob Hope show and talking about the Dallas football game. And, we all like sports. We all like, being a wild kid growing up and being adventurous and then moving into his military career and really thinking he's going to make a difference. He knew he was in the right place.
So that kind of kept us moving throughout the entire mission.
Dr. Janet Finlayson is a forensic anthropologist who also worked the An Thủy site.
It kind of kept the team motivated the entire time, while we're doing the same thing every day out there.
They'd start the work by damming off a section of the rice paddy and pumping water out. When it rained, it was a constant fight to keep the work area from filling back in.
When you're out there on mission, it's just kind of the same thing every day out there for the team. Something that we like to call Groundhog Day. You're pumping the water out of the dams. You're wet screening all day.
In the summer, the muddy surface dried and cracked in the sun. Wet mud turned as hard and heavy as cement. Workers split their shovels trying to break the ground and wriggle out a block of earth. They'd soak the block in water and sift through the mud, feeling for whatever little pieces didn't melt away, and then go rinse them off to see what they'd found. A rice root, a pebble, or something else. They had a small ritual for the end of each workday. The team gathered up and shouted, 1, 2, 3, Chipman and Forrester. Then they'd hit their bunks before another long day. After a few weeks, they had found a few airplane parts, but nothing definitely from an A6. Then the time ran out on their permit, and they had to pack their things. A new team arrived and found some landing gear, and this time, they could tell it came from an A6. But by the end of the season, that was about all they had found. The team felt like they were closer than ever. This had to be the place. But by now, investigators had been here several times over the course of 3 decades. They'd likely spent millions of dollars here, and there were other missing Americans on the DPAA's list. How many more return trips could the DPAA justify? How could they be sure the rice paddy still held any more clues?
Even after that first excavation, I had no level of confidence that they were digging in the right spot.
Karoni saw all the wreckage the dig teams were turning up, but she also knew from Lou's analysis that there was a crater here even before her dad went missing.
And we'd been at war over there for quite some time. So could that have been somebody else's crash site? And it's great news. I think someone's coming home. That is a win. I just didn't know if it was one of our guys.
Years ago, in the thick of her work with the League, Karoni visited Southeast Asia with a delegation of MIA families.
Vietnam could have been Mars to me when I was growing up. It was such a distant land. And then to be looking out the window, and I couldn't really, oddly enough, Karoni couldn't talk. I was struck with some silence.
She and a few other women from the League visited crash sites and talked with Vietnamese officials about recovery missions. I wondered what it was like for her to show up, asking for help, as the daughter of a man who'd been part of massive bombing campaigns against the North.
I'm thinking about, him in the context of this broader war, for the Vietnamese perspective. It was like, this was the worst for us, like that particular
Air
time.
pirates is
Right.
what they called them in their documentation.
And it's true for these people that were like there and lived this of like, just, one family was gone, the next like that. So I don't know if that was something that during your visit you were exposed to that perspective, and if that made you think.
Well, I guess I'd been exposed to the perspective because I'd seen the documents, right, where I knew he was listed as an air pirate. Because they've got something with Dad's name on it. I also didn't feel like people were looking at me like I was a criminal or a criminal's kid, per se, either. I was aware that they knew whose kid I was.
I wondered, too, about her feelings towards the people responsible for her father's death, and whether her visit stirred up a new sense of anger. But she said no.
Because when it comes down to it, we're all humans. And while we're on different sides of this war here, the cost of war is still human life.
At one point on her trip to Vietnam, Karoni went to a dig site in Quang Binh. She knew how close she was to An Thủy, but she didn't go.
I wasn't there to ask about Daddy. I was there to represent all families and let those foreign governments know this issue matters, and the families are going to keep coming back with questions. So when we were meeting with the government, it was very important that we weren't bringing up our case.
That's still the closest Karoni has come to the dig site for her father. But to tell this story the best I could, last fall, I decided I needed to go.
So I can go in the back.
So you want to sit there alone?
Yeah, or with him, I'll just sit on the right.
So one morning on my trip last December, I hired a driver and crammed myself into the back row of an SUV. Along with me were my Vietnamese minder, Hugh, and two foreign ministry officials who work on MIA affairs. One, a very young man, who didn't speak the whole time. With him was his boss, a chain-smoking, stylishly dressed man named An Thủy. While I had a Vietnamese official stuck with me on a long drive, I figured I'd ask Win some questions. Why does Vietnam help the U.S. Search for missing Americans?
Anh muốn hỏi là tại sao lại Việt Nam lại hỗ trợ bên bản thỏa thuận? The reason is humanitarian, and after the war end, the two governments had signed the peace agreement. And in that agreement, so we agree that like we're helping each other to find the martyrs and the remain of the social of both countries.
Win said it dates back to the end of the war, when both governments agreed to help one another recover service members' remains.
Hey listeners, it's Aisling Ayers with Texas Monthly. Spring is all about fresh air, sunshine, and good food. After a busy weekend, there's nothing better than a HelloFresh box waiting at my doorstep. I'm looking forward to some delicious protein-rich options, like the crispy panko sesame chicken and the saucy pork burrito bowls. Please help us thank HelloFresh for supporting the final flight of Captain Forrester. Go to hellofresh.com/flight10fm right now to get 10 free meals with a free item for life. Every HelloFresh meal uses high-quality ingredients, including seasonal fresh produce and proteins that travel from the farm to your doorstep. And the deliveries are flexible. You can pause or skip when you need. Meet your health and money-saving goals this spring with HelloFresh. Feel great with meals that fit your spring schedule and make the season even more delicious. Go to hellofresh.com/flight10fm right now to get 10 free meals with a free item for life. 1 per box with active subscription. Free meals applied as discount on first box. New subscribers only, varies by plan.
Wynn did say that at the local level, there are some older folks who are less supportive because of what they went through during the war. But he said it's also those people who survived the war who are often the key to finding the remains. Wynn said eyewitnesses are getting old or dying. And without them, even if authorities can figure out where a plane went down, they still might not know where to find remains of the crew.
And to search for that, they need to search through the local people. But actually, the people that live since that area, so they're getting too old.
In other words, time is running out to really be able to get good information. Because again, the young people maybe have heard, but maybe not.
The clue is from the local people, and they are getting old, and we are running out of time.
Right. Oh, okay. An Thủy is a small village with narrow paved roads. 1- and 2-story homes and businesses are crammed next to each other. A small canal winds through the village, carrying water to the rice paddies nearby. We arrived at a house and entered through a small courtyard. 2 large doors were already open. Inside was a sitting room with a low table and 6 ornate wooden chairs. Tea had been set out for us. The Vietnamese government had arranged this meeting for me. I wasn't sure what to expect. After a couple minutes, our host entered through another door. His name was Phan Thanh Vu. He was a slim man with white hair brushed into a comb-over, and he was wearing an old military uniform that was neatly creased. He was beaming with pride, and as he sat down, he made sure to pat his coat and pants flat. Very nice. Are we in his home right now?
Đây là nhà của bác đúng không? Nhà của bác.
Oh,
yes,
wonderful.
It's his house.
And there's photos. Beck, is this his son or yeah?
Anh muốn hỏi là có phải kia là con trai bác với cả vợ bác kia không ạ?
Tức là hai vợ chồng. Đây tôi là lúc về là thượng sĩ. Vợ là cũng trung sĩ, tức là cùng bộ đội.
His wife also served in the military.
Okay, fantastic.
Cùng đơn vị.
It's the same department.
Okay. Over the years, he's held a few official positions around An Thủy. But I was here to ask about a time well before that. You'll hear an actor translating for Vu. Okay, so I'll start with when did he serve and what was his role?
I joined in 1973. I was 19.
Vu told me he was born in An Thủy. He was the second of 9 siblings. He got involved with the resistance and then the army, alongside his friends.
I'd become a junior officer at 17. I was in the local militia, mainly helping with things like transporting food. It was wartime. As a young person, I was enthusiastic and joined the National Salvation Movement.
So his teenage years then were very much during the war. So what was that like for him?
Tại đây có chiến tranh các thứ nhiều không ạ?
Thôi thì khi lúc 17 tuổi.
The war lasted a long time. I witnessed many American planes bombing this area, using exact coordination. My house was burned. It was around 9 o'clock. I witnessed it. We ran to the fields and hid in tunnels.
Part of the house collapsed. but it wasn't destroyed. And his immediate family was safe. But in the war, his aunt in another village was shot dead by a passing plane. Another uncle lost an arm. And other families in An Thủy weren't as lucky as his.
This man's house was hit by a bomb, killing many people. The whole family died. They were all civilians, still young. One evening, a plane crashed in front of the village. The 57mm gun fired, the plane burned, and the people cheered. They were very happy, but also worried because shrapnel was flying everywhere. It crashed at night, but the body was found the next morning. I found a large parachute. Many people collected all the items and brought them home as trophies. We discovered the pilot's body as well. Only the head and arm were left.
I was stunned. I knew I'd be meeting a local veteran, and I was planning on asking about his memories of 1972, and specifically about the shootdown. But I wasn't expecting he'd recall so many details, and ones that lined up with Tiny 05. I immediately asked for more, and I hoped I could determine that the shootdown he witnessed was Tiny 05, and that the bodies he helped recover were Chipman and Forrester's.
Wow. And it's exactly the place that we've been today, so it may be maybe Forrester.
Possibly. Yeah, that could very possibly be. It sounds very similar. I don't know if this. I know he says he can't quite remember, but is there any chance he remembers anything about that? December. It was December 1972 was when Forrester was shot down.
Thế thì anh này anh ấy bảo là cái hồi trước là có một cái anh phi công tên là Forrester, người Mỹ cũng cùng quê với anh này.
I only knew he was a young white man. He had a young, fair, handsome face and short hair.
I found a photo of Ron Forrester on my phone and held it up for Vu.
That's Forrester when he was.
Đây là cái anh Forrester hồi trẻ, ảnh ở trong quân đội ấy.
He doesn't remember.
Doesn't remember.
It's too long ago.
There was one arm left. I think it was the right arm. I wrapped the arm. Remembering it, I feel very emotional. It was very close, about 500 meters from the crash site. I tried to bury him properly according to Vietnamese customs. There was no coffin, but I used a bag to wrap the pilot's remains and bury him respectfully, with his head facing the mountain. I did my best under the circumstances. When the war ended, they flattened the grave to make fields. They came back and dug, but couldn't find it. It's been 52 years. Too long.
Everything's been gone. That's. I almost want to believe that that it was, but yeah, it's like that little bit of it's kind of amazing still that he was involved with the burial. I'm just saying this to myself. Of like, wow.
He's the only one in the village and witnessed everything from the beginning.
Yeah. Wow. Again, if I feel certain that if the family could be here, they would want to meet him too and say thank you, and
I want to share the sorrow, pain, and loss with the family of Pilot Forrester. I am just a stranger, but I understand that pain.
Even if it wasn't Forrester and Chipman Vu had buried, his story left me conflicted. I felt sad for him and all the death and destruction he witnessed as a child, and for the two pilots, whoever they were, who died near the village. But it also felt like an affirmation that even after experiencing horrible violence, Vu retained his humanity. He had every reason to hate the men killing his neighbors and to withhold compassion for their families, but he didn't. Decency. That is what Vu displayed that night as a teenager, and what he demonstrated to me 52 years later. By the fall of 2022, DPAA search teams had established that, at some point, an A6 had crashed outside An Thủy, but there was nothing to prove that the wreck was Tiny 05, and no guarantee that the DPAA could send another team. The four horsemen decided it was time to chase down one last clue: those Vietnamese photographs in the museum from late 1972 of the wreckage of the 700th shootdown in Quang Binh. In the background of one photo was a silhouette of distant mountains with a distinctive saddleback between two peaks. Here's Joseph.
And so we looked in Google Earth to see where that was, and I want to say it was like 6 or 7 miles west of the village. But the problem is that it's difficult to assess distance, right, when you have a two-dimensional object.
Jay contacted another research volunteer, who contacted a buddy in Vietnam, who drove out to An Thủy on a scooter, carrying a copy of the old photo. He saw the same mountain range and walked around, holding the old photo up until he found the spot with the same perspective. He snapped a photo. He was standing next to a rice paddy, just yards from where the DPAA had been excavating.
So what that did was that determined that the people who were gathering this wreckage and piling it up on this berm were in this particular place. It's proof positive.
If there would ever be anything like an X on the ground, this was it. That October, Jay and the team presented what they'd found to the League and DPAA officials, and the agency announced it would send another team out in 2023. In February, the dig team arrived, the third in as many years. Each day, the site leader would give those talks about the two Marines to remind the team why they were here. This went on for about a month, and then one day, one member of the team's medic actually, realized he'd found something. Janet Finlayson, who you heard earlier, was the lead scientist on this dig.
Yeah, well, he called me over and, he was like, I think this is a tooth. And, I come over and look at it and I go, this is definitely a tooth. It's definitely a human tooth.
Janet almost didn't believe it.
We've been investigating this case since 1991. And, we've investigated the site over a dozen times before then and excavated the site 2 times before we were out there. And then all of a sudden you just, find this complete tooth.
The find energized the team, and soon they unearthed 2 more. In April, the 3 teeth went back to the forensic lab in Honolulu.
That's when I knew we were getting some answers. I didn't know, of course, who the teeth belonged to at the time.
Janet's team left, and while they waited for news from the lab, a new team arrived to keep digging. The new site leader was Will Ryan.
That was a May to June time period. Much hotter. Heat index is about 122 every day. And, it's kind of brutal on a team because you are almost having a team out there for 10 hours out in the heat without having any AC kind of thing.
But they knew the last team had found human remains there. And now, as they screened the dirt, small bone fragments began appearing. 12 in all, though it wasn't obvious whether they were human or animal. The bone fragments went to Honolulu for testing. A few weeks into the dig, it had rained the day before, so it was incredibly humid. A young Army sergeant and a Vietnamese woman who'd been there for every day of the dig were both sifting through dirt when, between them, a mud brick cracked open and a piece of plastic fell out. The sergeant found her captain and tapped him on the shoulder.
And she was kind of shaking, and I was like, what's going on?
In her hand was a piece of a credit card from the Humble Oil and Refining Company, off-white with blue lettering. Its edges were jagged, like a torn piece of paper, and a corner looked like it was charred and melted. 50 years ago, gas cards like these were a common kind of credit card. Printed on the back were terms and conditions, including in all caps, "Please notify Humble immediately of loss or theft." On the front was part of the card number, its expiration date, and the letters, clear as day, Orrester. The F was there, but it was slightly melted.
It was shredded, of course, plow blades and stuff like that. Probably did a toll on it, but you could pretty clearly see his name in there.
At the dig site in Quang Binh, the pace of the work picked up. Their time was running out. On one of their last mornings, a team member started, as usual, by cutting bricks of mud from the paddy. Captain Ryan passed by, and when he picked up the first brick in the row, he noticed something sticking out.
So I'm digging around, and you kind of see this cream-colored plastic sheath, and I squeezed it because it's covered in mud.
Captain Ryan alerted the site scientist, who'd taken over for Janet. His name is Blake Ayala.
So I just kind of gently washed it with some water in a bucket, and actually after getting all the dirt out, it's kind of just slid right out.
He pulled it out, and he held it in his hand, and he said it's Chipman's dog tag. So it looked like it fell off his neck yesterday, It just fell out there in the rice paddy. It was so pristine.
This was it. Here was the X on the ground. Forrester and Chipman died at this spot, and the dig team found teeth and bones. Now it was a matter of waiting and hoping for a positive identification. Karoni was at the annual MIA Family Update Conference when she heard what they'd found.
So I was in D.C., and the team had just gotten back from Vietnam the day before. And so I'm asking all kinds of questions about what they brought back. I saw that summary report that they had Jim Chipman's dog tag. That struck me more than this piece of plastic with my dad's name on it. But Jim's dog tag was around his neck. That was the first time I realized they were in the right spot. It was mind-blowing. Thought I needed to step outside for a second. And I was very happy. There was a feeling of accomplishment. Wow, we made this happen. And there was something tangible.
In August, the lab returned its first results. The teeth belonged to Jim Chipman. Chipman's remains were delivered to his hometown of American Fork, Utah. Waiting to receive him were his widow and his two sons, who were 4 years old and 20 months old when their father died. I met Jim's youngest son, Matt Chipman, at his home in Utah.
It was quite emotional for all of us. I think, it brought up some painful memories, but then also a lot of gratitude that this had actually happened and that we can now actually have a real funeral.
It was Veterans Day when Jim was buried. A full military detail accompanied his casket, draped in an American flag, on a procession through town.
It was very moving because, the Marine Corps escort comes and we met them at the Salt Lake International Airport. And they kept everyone on the airplane until that casket comes off the plane. Nobody moves. And the mayor rolled out the red carpet and they shut down Main Street. Over 1,000 people showed up, most of whom didn't even know him, just wanted to honor this soldier who'd been found. It was very moving.
Karoni Forrester was at home in December 2023 when she noticed a missed call from a Marine casualty officer.
You're at home, right?
I'm at home. And Chris was at home. Lillian was at home. It just so turned out all three of us happened to be home this Tuesday morning, which isn't that common.
She hollered for her husband and daughter to come.
And we called the casualty officer. I put it on speaker so that he could tell us all together. And he said, "We got a match." And I'm not sure what my immediate next question was. I just recall us all looking at each other.
After decades of watching other MIA families get the answers they'd been seeking, finally, it was her turn.
I don't feel like I'm going to lose it, but I feel like I'm supposed to be losing it. You know what I mean? The brain's like not knowing how to react.
For so long, Karoni had been rallying others who could help her find her father. There was only so much she could do herself. But now it was up to her to organize a fitting tribute.
Mahalo for your patience. At this time, Hawaiian Airlines Flight 81 with service to Honolulu. Here, gate number 3 will begin general boarding.
How are you this morning?
I'm doing all right. How are you?
Last fall, I went with Karoni to Hawaii for a reunion. In a 3-story office building on Joint Base Pearl Harbor Hickam, not too far from the beach, is a forensic anthropology lab operated by the DPAA. This is where scientists began to analyze her father's remains. Scientists took a small piece of one of the bones, ground it down into a fine powder, dissolved that powder in a liquid, and isolated the DNA. This one piece, out of all the dig team found, had belonged to Ron, likely part of either a hand or a foot. Soon, it would be buried in American soil. But for now, this small piece of him was right here. This was the moment Karoni had been waiting for her whole life. But of course, once she was inside the lab, she wanted to learn all she could to help other MIA families, and to help the scientists understand what families like hers have been through.
You know, I was a little kid in the 70s, right? But some of those families were involved when they had legitimate reason.
She was thinking back to those first confusing reports she'd gotten from the government, and how hard it became to trust what she'd heard back then.
Oh, absolutely. I completely agree with you.
And it is hard to completely step away and shake that.
No?
And so, trust building through science is super cool.
That's what I'm trying to do.
Well, I'm glad you're doing it.
Until finally, with the lab machines humming around us, we settled around one door in a hallway.
And hopefully we're getting the answers to families faster that way. So you ready to get your answer yet?
Yeah, tell me.
Okay. You want to do this?
Yeah.
Karoni and her husband Chris entered through a heavy door that locked behind them. I waited outside with the DPA scientists and a few of Karoni's friends. A couple minutes later, she opened the door and welcomed everyone inside. The room was oval-shaped, and it was cantilevered, jutting out a few floors above a courtyard. There were windows with heavy drapes drawn across. A large print of Ron's marine portrait stood off to one side. At the center of the room was a long conference table, with a cloth laying across it. On the cloth, in a neat row, were what looked like about 10 small, jagged stones, each around the size of a thumbnail. I looked closer and could see these were the fragments of bone. All of the work from so many people, sweating and digging, squinting at old photos, and for Karoni, a lifetime of rallying support and applying pressure. It had taken all of that to get these little bones onto the table before us. For the first time reporting this story, I could not imagine what Karoni was feeling. She picked up one of the bones and rubbed it with her fingers, like a long-lost coin. She held in her hands the truth she'd been fighting to uncover for almost 40 years. Captain Ron Forrester, her father, had been found. But he wasn't home yet either. One last flight would get him there. That's coming up in the last episode of The Final Flight of Captain Forrester. The Final Flight of Captain Forrester is a Texas Monthly production. Our executive producer is Megan Cright. The show is reported and written by me, Josh Alvarez, and written and produced by Patrick Michaels. It was produced and engineered by Brian Standifer, who also wrote the music, with additional production by Ella Kopakin and Aisling Ayers. Story editing by J.K. Nickel, Ross McCammon, and Mark Warren. Paul Knight is our fact-checker. Artwork is by Emily Kimbrough and Victoria Milner. Vietnamese translation in this episode was by Kay Lin Ngo. Mr. Vu was voiced, in English, by Tam Duan. See y'all next week. Thanks for listening, and if you don't want to wait for the next episode, sign up for a Texas Monthly audio subscription to hear it right now. You'll also get bonus episodes that'll take you deeper into the story, and unlimited access to everything at texasmonthly.com. Visit texasmonthly.com/audio.